The morning the accusation broke, I was already at my post outside the east colonnade, and I remember thinking the light was too clean for the kind of day it would become. My name is Corwin Hale, and for 11 years I stood the king's ceremonial watch in the house of Harrogate. I am not a clever man in the way the court prizes cleverness. I do not read a room for advantage. I do not trade favors. I do not know which fork the fish is meant to take. What I know is stillness. I know how to hold a line with my body while my mind runs quiet and level underneath, the way a river runs under ice. I know the weight of a rifle across 11 hours. And I had learned, over those 11 years, to see the palace not as the court saw it, a stage of silk and precedence, but as a machine of small movements, where a footman who took the servant's stair 2 minutes early, or a door left ajar that should be shut, told you more than any proclamation read from the balcony. So when the accusation came, I did not hear it as gossip. I heard it as a movement in the machine, and I knew, the way you know a wrong note before you can name it, that something underneath had shifted. It began with the Queen Consort, Morwenna, and it began the way her worst work always began, softly, in a room full of witnesses she had chosen herself. The king held audience that morning in the Amber Room, a long gallery of gilt and old portraits where the light came through tall windows in bars. King Alaric sat as he always sat, upright and gray and tired in a way the crown could not hide anymore, and around him stood the court in its careful arrangement. I was not meant to be inside. My post was the colonnade. But the door stood open for the heir, and a guard who has learned the machine learns also to keep his ears open through open doors, and so I heard it begin. "My lord husband," Morwenna said, and her voice carried the way she meant it to carry, sweet and grieved and pitched to reach the far wall. "I would not raise this if it were not a matter of the crown's honor, but I cannot in conscience keep silent. It concerns Rowan. Rowan, the crown prince, the king's son by his first wife, the late Queen Isolde, and the one obstacle, everyone at court understood without ever saying it, between Morwenna's own children and the fullness of the throne. She never moved against him openly. She was cleverer than that. She moved the way water moves against stone, patient, formless, always finding the crack. What of my son? The king said, not a question, a door held shut. There is talk, Morwenna said, and I have seen enough myself to fear it is more than talk. 3 nights this month, Rowan has left the palace after the gates were sealed. Alone, against protocol, without his guard, without his log, without a word to the household. He returns before dawn. When Chamberlain Voss asked him where he had been, he would not answer. He said only that it was his own affair. She let that sit, and then she added the blade, gentle as a kindness. A crown prince has no affairs that are his own. That is the first thing we are taught. Whatever he is doing in the dark, my lord, a gaming house, a woman, a debt, a faction, I do not know, and I dread to know, he is doing it in a way that could shame the house if it were seen. And things that are done in the dark are always, in the end, seen. I watched the room take it in. I watched the little tightenings of the mouth, the eyes that slid toward the crown prince where he stood near the windows, and the way the space around Rowan seemed to widen by an inch, though no one had moved. That is how it works at a court. You are not exiled by a decree. You are exiled by an inch of space that opens and does not close. Rowan did not flinch. I will say that for him, and I did not always love him. He was a difficult man to serve, close and cool and given to long silences. A son who had learned early that showing his heart to that court was like showing your throat to a dog. But he did not flinch. He said, "It is true I have left the palace at night. It is true I did not log it. I will not tell you why." The whole room seemed to exhale at once. Even the king's shoulders dropped a fraction, and in that fraction I saw the thing Morwenna had been building toward for years. The moment the father began, against his will, to believe the worst of his son. "You will not tell me," the king repeated. "I cannot," Rowan said. "Not yet. I am asking you to trust me." "Trust," Morwenna murmured, so softly it was almost not for anyone. is a great deal to ask of a man who keeps secrets from his own father in the dark. And there it was. She had not accused him of a single specific thing. That was the genius of it. She had accused him of the shape of a thing, of secrecy, of protocol broken, of dark errands unexplained, and let every mind in the room fill the shape with its own worst imagining. You cannot disprove a shape. You can only stand inside it while it hardens around you. The king rose. He was a man who hated scenes, and Morwenna knew that too. "Enough," he said. "This is not a matter for an open room. Rowan, you will not leave the grounds again without my leave. The matter is closed until I choose to open it." But it was not closed. Nothing she started was ever closed. It was planted, and it would grow in the dark of the courts, whispering all day and all week, and by the time it flowered it would have a name and a shape and a verdict. And the verdict would be that the crown prince was unfit, reckless, secretive, a risk to the house, and that perhaps the succession itself deserved a second, prudent look. I had watched her do it to a chamberlain, to a treasurer, to Isolde's old ladies-in-waiting one by one. I knew the whole arc of it before it had left the first room. What I did not yet know was the truth. And I want to be honest about that, because the story that later ran through the court made me out to be some kind of loyal knight who knew all along. I did not know all along. On that morning I knew only two things. I knew that Morwenna was lying not in her facts, but in the shape she was building from them. And I knew that Rowan had a reason he would not give, and that a man with a shameful reason hides it with excuses, while a man with a reason he cannot give hides it with silence. Rowan was silent the way a man is silent over a grave. That was enough to make me watch him, and I had, as it happened, the means to watch that no one at that court suspected. I should explain the camera, because the whole thing turns on it, and I would not have you think me some spy by nature. 6 months before, there had been an incident at the south gate, a man in the crowd who reached inside his coat, a scuffle, a claim afterward that a guard had struck a citizen without cause. It was a lie. The man had been reaching for a bottle to throw. But it was my word against his, and my word, the word of a guardsman, weighed nothing against a citizen with a bruise and a grievance and a cousin who wrote for the broadsheets. The matter dragged for a month and nearly ended my service. In the end it was dropped, but it left a mark on me, and it left me with a resolve. I would never again stand accused with nothing but my own word to answer. So I bought, out of my own poor pay, a small recording camera, the kind the newer bodyguards abroad were said to wear, no larger than a coin, that clipped inside a collar or a breast fold and saw what the wearer saw. It was not palace issue. It was, strictly, against a dozen protocols of my own. I told no one. I wore it on the long postings, the night watches, the escort duties, and each morning I locked its little slips of memory in a tin under a loose board in my quarters, and I never once looked at them, because there had never been cause. I wore it the way a man carries an umbrella he hopes never to open. It was insurance against the day my word would not be enough. I tell you this so you understand. I did not set out to catch the crown prince at anything. When the king's order came down, Rowan not to leave the grounds without leave, the household naturally doubled the watch on the prince's wing, and the rotation put me on the corridor outside his apartments 3 nights of that week. I wore the camera as I wore it everywhere, out of habit and old fear. I had no more thought of the truth than the door I leaned beside had. The first 2 nights, nothing. Rowan kept to his rooms. I heard him pacing sometimes, the slow tread of a man who does not sleep, and once near 2 in the morning I heard something I could not place, a low sound, not quite a voice, that I decided was the wind in the old flue, and did not decide very well. The 3rd night he left. It was past midnight. The corridor was cold. The great house ticks and settles at that hour like a ship. I heard his door, and then I saw him, the Crown Prince of Eldermore, in a plain dark coat with no orders, no star, no mark of rank, a coat a groom might wear, and a soft cap pulled low. He stopped when he saw me. For a moment we only looked at each other, the accused prince and the guard set to watch him, and I understood that this was the exact moment his father's order had been meant to prevent. I should have stopped him. That was my order and my duty. The king had said he was not to leave the grounds. Every protocol I served demanded that I bar his way or raise the watch. I did neither. And I have asked myself 100 times since why, and the truest answer I can give is this: because of the silence over the grave. Because a man does not wear a groom's coat to a gaming house or to a mistress. He wears his own fine coat, or he sends a servant, or he does not go at all. Because Rowan's face in that cold corridor was not the face of a man sneaking to a pleasure. It was the face of a man going to something that cost him, and hiding it not from shame but from fear, and fear, at that court, meant fear for someone. You do not fear for yourself when you are the crown prince. You fear for what is smaller than you. "Corwin," he said. He knew my name. He knew every man's name on his watch, which was more than most princes troubled to. "You'll want to raise the alarm." "Yes, your highness," I said. "That is my order." "Then raise it," he said, very quiet, "and I will go anyway over the garden wall if I must, and you will have done your duty and I will have done what I must, and nothing will be helped." He looked at me a long moment. "Or you can let me pass and I will be back before the change of watch and no one need know, and I give you my word as your prince that I am doing no dishonor to this house. None. The opposite. But I cannot prove it to you, and I have no right to ask you to risk your service on my word." He was right that he had no right to ask, and I want to be clear that what I did next was not obedience. It was the opposite of obedience, and I have never pretended otherwise. I stepped back against the wall, and I let the crown prince break the king's own order and pass me into the dark. But I did one thing more, and it is the thing that saved him. As he moved past me, I did not raise the alarm, but I did not simply stand blind either. I fell in behind him at a distance, silent as I know how to be, and I let the little camera at my collar run. If I was to gamble my service on this man's word, I would at least have the truth of where that word led. If he was lying, I would have it recorded, and I would carry it to the king myself and take my punishment for letting him pass. And if he was telling the truth, if there was some honor in this dark errand that he could not or would not defend in that gilded room full of his enemies, then I would have that too. I would have proof that no shape Morwenna built could stand against. I did not know, following him through the sleeping palace and out the low postern that the old guard forgets to lock, which of those two things I was recording. I told myself I did not care, that I only wanted the truth. That was not quite honest. Even then, following the dark coat through the kitchen gardens under a thin moon, some part of me was already hoping the sun was better than the shape they were building around him. Hoping the machine of the palace had, for once, a wrong note in it that pointed toward something good instead of something rotten. He went out through the postern and turned not toward the town, where a man goes for pleasure or vice, but the other way down toward the river road, toward the poor quarter that clings to the water where the palace's back turns to it. I followed, and the camera ran, and whatever the crown prince of Eldermoor was walking toward in the dark, I was walking toward it too, one silent step behind, with the truth of it gathering in a coin of glass at my collar. The river road at that hour is a different country. By day it is carts and washerwomen and the smell of the tanneries. By night it is dark water and darker doorways, and a man in a fine coat would be a fool to walk it, which was exactly why Rowan wore no fine coat. He moved like a man who had walked it before, not lost, not gawking, but with the steady, unremarkable pace of the local and the known. That alone told me something. Whatever this was, it was not the first night. This was a road he had worn smooth. He turned down a lane I did not know between a shuttered chandler's and a wall of black brick, and stopped at a low door with a lamp burning above it, the only lamp in that whole dark run of the street, a small brave flame in a horn lantern. He knocked. Not the knock of a man expected at a fine house. A soft, particular knock, two and then one, the knock of a man who has been taught the sign. And the door opened, and warm light fell out across the wet stones, and I heard a voice, a woman's, low and tired and glad, say, "You came. God bless you, you came again." And the Crown Prince of Eldermore stepped inside, and the door closed, and I stood in the dark of the lane with my heart going hard, because I did not yet know what I had followed him to, and every shape the palace had taught me to imagine was crowding at the edges of that warm closed door. I found a shadow across the lane between two dead barrels, and I settled to wait, and I let the camera run on the closed door and the brave small lamp, and I told myself that whatever came out of that house, I would carry it whole to the king, and let the truth fall where it fell. He was inside better than an hour. I have stood many long watches, but I do not think I have ever counted minutes the way I counted them in that lane. The cold came up off the river and into my boots. Twice a drunk lurched past the mouth of the lane and did not see me. Once a rat crossed the wet stones between us with the unhurried confidence of a thing that owns the dark. And all the while I watched the door and the small brave lamp above it, and I tried to build, from the one sentence I had heard, some picture of what lay behind it. You came again. So he had come before. God bless you. So he was welcome and needed. But a low door in the poor quarter, and a woman's voice, and a prince in a groom's coat. I knew what shape the court would build from that, because it was the easiest shape and the ugliest, and it fit everything Morwenna had planted that morning. A woman, a debt, a secret kept in the dark. I did not believe it. But I am a plain man, and I have seen plain men undone by believing the good of someone they had no proof of. And so I made myself hold the ugliest shape in my mind alongside the hope, and I waited for the door to tell me which was true. When it opened at last, it was not Rowan who came out first. It was the woman. She stepped into the lamplight to see him off, and I saw her clearly for the first time, not young, not a beauty a prince would ruin himself for, but worn thin and gray-faced with the particular weariness I have only ever seen on people who nurse the sick. She had a cloth over her shoulder, and her sleeves were pushed up past the elbow, and her hands, when she reached to grip Rowan's arm at the threshold, were the raw red hands of a woman who has been wringing rags in cold water for hours. And behind her, through the open door, I could see into the one low room of the house, and I could see what was in it, and the ugly shape I had been holding in my mind fell apart all at once, and I was ashamed I had held it. There was a bed pulled close to the small fire, and in the bed a shape too small to be a grown man, propped up on what looked like every cushion and folded coat the house owned, and beside the bed a second, older woman asleep upright in a chair with a rosary of plain wooden beads slack in her fingers. The room was poor past describing. I could see the bare boards, the single shelf, the cracked window stuffed with rag against the river damp. But it was clean. It had been made clean the way only love makes a poor room clean, scrubbed and ordered against the disorder of illness, every poor thing in its poor place. And on a stool by the bed sat a bowl and a spoon and a stoppered bottle of some dark physic, and I understood, all in a rush, what a prince in a groom's coat carried down the river road in the dark 3 nights of a month. Medicine, he was carrying medicine. He took the whole of it, the woman was saying, low, her voice cracking with a relief so raw it hurt to hear. The whole spoon, and he kept it down, and his brows cooler than it was. Feel it, it's cooler. I truly think the fever's turned. I truly think this time it's turned. She pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. I don't, my lord, I've no words. There's no words for what you've. Then don't spend any, Rowan said, and his voice in the dark lane was not the cool, closed voice of the amber room at all. It was gentler than I had ever heard it, and rougher, a voice with the roughness a man's voice gets when he is holding something down hard. Get what sleep you can. I'll send the physician's man before dawn with the second bottle the way we've done, and you'll send to me at the sign if the fever climbs again. At the sign, mind, not by any name, not by any letter, only the sign. You understand why? I understand why, she said. I'll not put your name to it, on my life I'll not. Do you think I don't know what they'd make of it? A terrible small laugh. A prince buying physic for a washerwoman's for the boy, they'd make it filth, wouldn't they? They'd make it something to shame you, when it's the only clean thing. Hush now, Rowan said. It's not the only clean thing, but it's ours and we'll keep it ours. Go in out of the cold. She went in, the door closed. And the Crown Prince of Eldermore stood a moment alone under the small brave lamp with his head bowed, and I saw his shoulders move once, hard, the way a man's shoulders move when he lets go of a breath he has been holding for hours, and then he squared them and pulled his cap low, and turned back up the lane toward the palace and the trap that was closing around him, carrying nothing now but the truth he had decided he would rather be ruined than tell. I let him pass. I gave him 100 yards and then I followed, and my hand kept going to the small warm coin of glass at my collar, because I knew now exactly what it held, and I knew it was worth more than my service and more than my life, and I was afraid of it the way you are afraid of a thing too valuable to be trusted to your own poor keeping. Here is what I had, recorded in that little slip of memory. The Crown Prince of Eldermore, accused before the court of breaking protocol for some dark and shameful errand, slipping out of the palace against the king's own order, to carry medicine, at his own cost, in his own hands, to a dying child in the poor quarter, and to hide it not because it shamed him, but because he feared, rightly, that his enemies would turn even that into filth. That was the protocol break. That was the dark secret Morwenna had built her whole soft campaign upon. A secret act of mercy, done 3 cold nights a month, at the risk of his crown, for a child who would never know a prince had knelt in the dark to keep him alive. I understand now why he could not tell it in the amber room. It was not only that they would soil it. It was the woman's life, and the boy's. Morwenna's reach did not stop at the palace walls. If she learned there was a household in the poor quarter that the Crown Prince loved enough to risk his succession for, a household with a name and a low door and a small brave lamp, then that household became a lever, and a lever in Morwenna's hand was a thing that got used. He was not hiding a shame. He was hiding a hostage. He was standing inside the ugly shape they had built, taking the whole weight of it on his own back, because the only way to prove his innocence was to hand his enemy a knife pointed at the 2 people he had gone into the dark to save. That is the thing the court never understands about honor. The court thinks honor is a thing you display. It is the opposite. Honor is most often the thing you carry in silence, at cost, while men who have none stand in the gilded room and call you dishonorable to your face, and you let them, because the alternative is to spend someone smaller than you to buy your own good name. I followed him back through the postern, back through the sleeping gardens, back up the cold corridor to the door of his apartments, and there, before he went in, he stopped and turned to me one last time. "You followed me," he said. It was not a question. He had known then or guessed. A man who has learned to move in the dark hears the second set of feet. "I did, Your Highness." To the door and back. He was quiet a moment, and I saw him weighing it, weighing whether I was Morwenna's man, whether I had been set on him, whether the thing he had spent his crown to hide was now spilled into the worst possible hands. It is a hard thing to watch a man reckon whether you have just destroyed him. "Then you know," he said at last, very low. "I know that you carried physic to a sick child 3 streets off the river," I said, "and that you'd rather the court believed you a rake or a gambler than let it learn there's a household you'd bleed for. I know that much, Your Highness. I don't know the child's name, and I don't want to. And I'll tell you plain, I let you pass tonight against my order, and I followed you against another, and I did it because a man who wears a groom's coat to a low door is either the worst kind of man or the best, and I wanted to know which. Now I know." "And what will you do with knowing?" he asked, not pleading. He was past pleading, just tired and honest and braced for the worst. I did not answer him at once, because the honest answer was that I did not yet know, and I have made it a rule never to give a man a comfort I am not sure I can keep. What I knew was that I held, in a coin of glass, the ruin of Morwenna's whole design and the clearing of his name, and that the moment I used it, I also spilled the secret he had spent everything to keep, and handed his enemy the very lever he had bled to deny her. The truth that saved him and the truth that endangered them were the same truth. I could not free him without exposing them. That was the trap under the trap, and I do not think even Rowan had seen how tight it was drawn until he saw me standing in his corridor with the knowledge in my keeping. "I'll do nothing tonight, Your Highness," I said. "And I'll say nothing. You have my word, and my word is the only thing I own outright, so it's not nothing. Sleep if you can. Let me think on it. There may be a way to answer them that doesn't put a lamp over that low door, but I'll not move a step toward it without your leave, because it's not my secret to spend." He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his face, some guard that had been up so long it had grown into the bone, eased, just slightly, the way a man eases who has carried a thing alone so long he had forgotten it could be shared. "Isolde chose the guard well," he said, so quiet I nearly missed it, and I understood he meant his mother, the late queen, who had set the standards of this house before Morwenna came to unmake them. "Good night, Corwin." And he went in, and I went back to my post, and I stood the rest of that watch with a coin of glass at my collar that was worth a crown, trying to see the shape of a way through, a way to clear an innocent man without spending the innocence he had bled to save. I did not find it that night, but I had begun, and I want to set down what I learned in the days that followed, because the finding of it was not a clean thing, and the court has since told it far too clean. Morwenna did not wait. By the second morning after, the shape she had planted in the amber room had put out roots in every corridor of the house. I heard it in the servants' hall, retold 3 ways, each uglier than the last. I heard it from a footman who swore the prince kept a woman in the town. I heard it from a laundry maid who swore it was worse than a woman, that he was in debt to hard men, that he had signed away lands, that the house would wake one morning to find the crown prince a bought creature of some faction across the water. None of them had a fact. All of them had the shape. And the shape, once it is loose in a house, does not need facts. It feeds on the silence of the man who will not defend himself, and Rowan's silence was a banquet. I want you to understand how well she had chosen her ground. A guilty man protests. He explains, he blusters, he produces alibis that don't quite fit. The more he explains, the guiltier he looks, which is a thing the guilty never learn. But a man who cannot speak because the truth would harm the innocent, that man does the one thing that damns him utterly in the eyes of a court. He stays silent. And silence to a court is confession. Morwenna knew Rowan would be silent. She had not built a trap that caught liars. She had built a trap that caught the honorable and baited it with the one thing an honorable man will always, always do: protect someone who cannot protect himself at his own cost. On the 3rd morning, she moved the matter out of whispers and into the machinery. She did it as she did everything, wearing the face of reluctant duty. She came to the king in his study. I had the corridor watch, so I saw her go in, and I heard the shape of it through the door, though not every word. And she brought with her Chamberlain Voss, a dry stick of a man whose whole soul had long since been sold for the small comfortable safety of never being on the losing side, and Lord Cassius, her own son by an earlier marriage, a smooth and hungry young man who wore his mother's ambition the way a lesser man wears his father's watch. "My lord," she said, "I have prayed I was wrong. I am not wrong. He went out again 2 nights ago, past midnight, against your express order. The night watch will confirm it." That was a blow I had not braced for, and I felt it land in my own chest. The night watch, she meant me. And another guard besides. I had not been the only man posted that wing, though I had been the man at his door. If the household questioned the watch, I would be asked, under my oath, whether the crown prince had left his rooms against the king's order on the 3rd night. And he had, and I had let him. My silence would be a lie under oath, and my truth would be the first stone in the road that led to a low door and a small brave lamp. "The crown prince denies nothing," Voss said in his dry voice, "which is itself a kind of admission, my lord. A man with an innocent errand names it, the prince will not name his. I have served this house 40 years, and I have never known an honest man so silent about where he spends his nights. He asks for your trust, Morwenna said, gentle as a wound, and I do not doubt your love for him would grant it. But my lord, trust is a private gift, and the succession of the crown is not a private matter. If it were only your heart in the balance, I would say, trust your son and God keep you both. But it is the house. It is the throne. It is every soul in the realm who will one day kneel to whoever wears the crown, and who has the right to know that the man they kneel to keeps no secrets that could be used against them in the dark. She let that land. Then, softer still, the true blade under all the others. There are, of course, other lines. Other children of your body, my lord, who keep no secrets, who log every hour, who have never once slipped out a postern in a groom's coat. I say nothing against Rowan. I only say a prudent king looks at all his sons before he stakes a kingdom on the most secretive of them. There it was at last out loud. Other children of your body. Cassius stood by the door with his face composed into a mask of dutiful concern, and I looked at that mask and I understood the whole machine at once, the way you understand a clockwork when the last gear clicks home. This had never been about Rowan's errands. The errands were only the crack in the stone. The water Morwenna was pouring through the crack was the succession itself, and the vessel she meant to fill was her own son. The king was quiet a long time. When he spoke, his voice had aged 10 years since the amber room. "What are you asking me to do, Morwenna?" "Nothing cruel," she said. "Nothing final. Only this, convene the household council. Let the matter be heard properly under the old forms so that it is settled with honor and not left to rot in whispers. Let Rowan answer for his conduct before the council, and if he will not answer, let the council weigh what his silence means. If he is innocent, the forms will clear him and the whispers will die. If he is not," she spread her hands, the very picture of grief, "then better we know now, before a crown is on his head, than after." It was, I will grant her, beautifully done. She had asked for nothing that sounded unjust. A hearing, the old forms. A chance for the accused to clear his name. Any man would call it fair. Only I, standing in the corridor with a coin of glass in my quarters that held the truth, could see it for what it was. A machine built so that Rowan's honor would destroy him, because he could not answer. And a household council would read his silence exactly as Morwenna had trained the whole house to read it, as guilt, and it would recommend with grave regret and perfect procedure that the succession be reviewed. And a king who half believed the worst of his son already, worn down and grieving and old, might let it stand. "Convene it," the king said, and I heard in the two words the sound of a father's heart cracking along a line his wife had scored for years. "In 7 days, let it be done under the forms. And God forgive me if I am wrong about my son." I went off watch that morning and I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed with the tin open on my knees and the little slip of memory in my palm, no larger than a fingernail, and I turned the whole trap over and over looking for the seam. The council would sit in 7 days. Rowan would be asked before the assembled lords of the house where he went in the dark. He would refuse. His refusal would damn him. I could stop it. I had in my hand the whole of the truth, and if I laid the recording before the council, the trap sprang the other way, and it was Morwenna who stood exposed, her grief a performance, her fairness a knife. But the recording did not only clear Rowan. It showed the low door. It showed the woman with the raw red hands. It showed, through the open door, the small shape in the bed by the fire. Show that to the council and you show it to Morwenna, and Morwenna would have a name and a street within the day, and then the thing Rowan had bled to prevent would come to pass. The sick child in the poor quarter would become a piece on her board, and she would move it, and she moved pieces off the board when she was done with them. The truth that freed him was the truth that condemned them. I turned it, and the two would not come apart. So I did the only thing a plain man can do when he cannot see the way through a thing. I went looking for more of the thing, on the theory, half faith, half stubbornness. that a truth big enough always has more sides than the one you're stuck on, and that if I could learn the whole of it I might find a side that cut cleanly. I could not go to Rowan. He had told me nothing but the door, and I would not press him for the rest. So over the next days, on my own hours out of uniform, I went down to the river quarter myself, and I did what a guard is trained to do and a courtier never learns. I watched, and I listened, and I asked no questions that would put a name to anything. I learned it in pieces. I learned that the low door belonged to a widow named, I will not write her name even now, old habit, the sign not the name, a widow who had been, years ago, in the household of the late Queen Isolde, a nursery woman. One of the women Morwenna had turned out when she came, part of that quiet purge of Isolde's people that everyone at court had noticed and no one had named. The widow had gone down into the poor quarter with nothing, as the turned out always do, and she had raised her dead daughter's boy there on washing and mending, and the charity of neighbors as poor as herself. And the boy had fallen ill in the autumn with a wasting fever that the free physicians of the quarter could not touch, and the good physicians of the town would not touch for less coin than a washerwoman sees in a year. And Rowan had learned of it. That was the piece I could not fully fill, and I have my guess, and I will give it as a guess. I think the widow at the end of her rope had sent word up to the palace, to the one person left in the world who might remember her, not to the prince, but to the memory of the queen who had once employed her, a message flung like a bottle into the sea. And I think it had reached Rowan, who kept his mother's people in his heart the way he kept everything, in silence and deep. And I think Rowan, who could have sent a servant and a purse and washed his hands of it, had instead gone himself, 3 cold nights a month, in a groom's coat, to carry the physic with his own hands and see the child's fever with his own eyes. Because a purse can be stolen and a servant can be bought and turned into a witness against him. But a thing you do yourself in the dark, telling no one, cannot be turned by anyone. Except that it could. It could be turned by a guard with a coin of glass at his collar, if that guard were a fool or a knave. And I was neither, I hoped, but the truth sat in my quarters like a lit fuse, and I still could not see how to cut it without the fire reaching the low door. Then the game changed, as games do, because I was not the only one hunting. It was Princess Ilara who first made me understand that I had run out of time. Ilara was Rowan's sister, the king's daughter by Isolde, and so the other of that pair, the Queen Consort, had never quite managed to break. She was younger than Rowan, quick where he was deep, and she had none of his fatal talent for silence. She would say a true thing in a room full of liars and dare them to gainsay her, which had made her both loved and endangered. She caught me on the garden stair 4 days before the council was to sit, and she did it in the way of a woman who has been thinking hard and has decided a plain guard is the safest confidant left to her. "You had the door watch," she said, low, no greeting, "the 3rd night when my brother went out." I did not answer. A guard's face is a wall, and I have a good one. "You needn't tell me what you saw," she said. "I don't want you forsworn, but I want you to know what I know because I think you already half know it, and I think you may be the only man in this house who might do something about it. My brother is not what she is making him. I would stake my life on it, but I've done more than stake my life. I've been asking questions quietly, and Corwin, I think she's been asking the same ones. I think Cassius has men down in the town. I think they're close to something. And I'm afraid that whatever it is my brother's protecting, they'll reach it before the council sits, and then it won't matter what the council decides because they'll have already—" She stopped, and I saw real fear cross her quick face. "They'll have already used it." That was the piece that turned the whole thing over. I had been thinking of the recording as a bomb I dared not set off, a truth too dangerous to speak. Ilara's fear made me see it the other way. The danger was not in my speaking. The danger was already loose. Morwenna had not built her whole design on Rowan's silence alone. She had put men in the town to find out what he was silent about, so that if the silence held she could break it herself at the moment of her choosing in the ugliest possible way. She did not want the truth to stay hidden. She wanted to be the one who revealed it twisted at the council before the king, so that the mercy became the scandal and the child became the proof of the prince's recklessness. Look, she would say. He risked the succession, the honor of the house, the king's own order, for what? For a washerwoman's brat, a nobody, one of the old queen's discarded servants. Is this the judgment we want on the throne? She would soil it. Rowan had known she would soil it. And a truth that Morwenna revealed and soiled would be a very different thing from a truth I revealed clean. That was the seam. I had been looking for it for a week, and Alara's fear had shown it to me at last. The question had never been whether the truth came out. In 7 days, one way or another, the truth was coming out. Cassius's men would dig it up if I did nothing. The only question was who told it and how, and in whose light. If Morwenna told it, it was filth and ruin. If I told it plainly, wholly, with the recording that showed a prince's own hands carrying medicine to a dying child, showed his gentleness, showed his fear for the household, showed the whole shape of it as it truly was, then it was the noblest thing anyone in that house had done in 20 years, and it was Morwenna who would stand in the ugly light, exposed as a woman who had tried to make a crime out of a mercy to steal a crown for her son. But it had to be done fast, and it had to be done in a way that protected the low door even as it revealed it, and for that I could not act alone. A guard does not summon a household council. A guard does not stand before the king and say, "My lord, watch this." I had the truth. I did not have the standing to spend it. And the one person with both the standing and the love for Rowan to spend it rightly was standing on the garden stair in front of me, telling me she was afraid. "Your Highness," I said, and I made the choice that I have never regretted, the choice to trust the one honest face left in that house. "I need to tell you a thing, and I need to tell it to you and to one other, and then I need your help to do a hard thing quickly. But first you must swear to me, on your mother's memory, for it touches her people, that you will not move on it until we've agreed how, because there's a life in it that isn't ours to spend." She went very still. "My mother's people," she repeated softly, and I saw understanding begin in her eyes. "It's one of hers, one she took in, one Morwenna turned out." "I've said nothing," I said, which was a guard's yes. "On my mother's memory," Alara said, "tell me." So I told her. I told her about the third night and the groom's coat and the river road, about the low door and the small brave lamp and the widow with the raw red hands, about the small shape in the bed and the physic carried in a prince's own hands, about the sign that was not a name and Rowan's fear, and the trap under the trap that made his innocence into his ruin. And I told her about the coin of glass in the tin under the loose board and what it held. She wept once hard and briefly, the way strong people weep when a thing they have half known becomes whole, not for grief, but for the relief of a truth that turns out to be better than the fear. Then she wiped her face and became, in front of me, the granddaughter of kings. "Then we do not wait for the council," she said. "If we wait, Cassius's men find the widow first and Morwenna owns the telling. We take it to my father before the council sits, to my father and to my Aunt Adela, who is the only soul at that court my father still trusts against his own wife, and who has no fear of Morwenna in her because she remembers Morwenna as a lady-in-waiting and cannot be made afraid of a woman she once outranked. The 3 of us. Tonight, if it can be done. And the low door," she thought quickly, "the low door we do not name. Not to the council, not in any record. We show my father the truth, we let him see what his son truly did, and we make him understand that the household must be protected before it can be spoken of anywhere. That the first act of clearing Rowan must be to put the widow and the boy under the crown's own protection, out of Morwenna's reach, before a single word is said where she can hear it. Protect them first. Then clear him. In that order, or it all comes apart." I could have wept myself then for the pure relief of hearing my own week of stuck reasoning solved by a mind quicker than mine. That was the seam, and she had cut it clean in a minute on a garden stair. Protect them first, then clear him. The truth that endangered them and the truth that freed him were the same truth. But if you moved the innocents to safety before you spoke the truth, Then the truth had no hostage left in it, and Morwenna's whole design collapsed into what it had always been underneath. A woman who had tried to turn a mercy into a crime, caught in the light with the knife still in her hand. But we were 4 days from the council, and Cassius's men were already in the town, and I did not know how close they were. That was the false dawn of it, the moment we had a plan and let ourselves believe for one night that the hard part was the plan. It was not the plan, it was the 4 days. Because the next morning, before we could bring it to the king, Morwenna moved early. She always moved early when she sensed the ground shifting. It was the surest sign that she felt something slipping. Word came down through the household like cold water. The household council would not sit in 7 days after all. It would sit in 2. The king, it was said, wished the matter settled before the month's end audience with the visiting envoys, so that no whisper of scandal touched the house while foreign eyes were on it. That was the reason given. The true reason, I did not doubt, was that Morwenna had sensed Alara stirring, had sensed the ground move under some part of her design, and had pulled the whole thing forward to strike before her enemies could set their feet. 2 days. And worse, that same morning, a footman I trusted, one of Isolde's old people who had survived the purge by making himself invisible, came to me white-faced in the armory passage. "Corwin, 2 men were down at the river last night asking after a widow that used to be in the old queen's nursery, asking which house, offering coin for the number of the door." He swallowed. "They found a man who'd take the coin. They have the street. I don't think they have the door yet, but they have the street, and they'll have the door by tonight." The fuse had been lit at both ends, and the fire in the middle was a low door with a small brave lamp, and 2 days had just become 2 hours, and I was a guard with no standing and a coin of glass in a tin, and the only thing between Morwenna and the child was how fast we could move now tonight, before her men knocked their own 2-and-1 on that door, and took away the last innocent thing in the whole rotten business. We did not have time to do it right. We did it fast, and I thank God we did it fast. I found Alara in the long gallery, and I told her the street was known and the door soon would be, and I watched her decide, in 3 heartbeats, to spend her rank the way I had spent my service. "Then we protect them now," she said, "and we ask forgiveness after. Get me to my aunt. Adela will not flinch." Princess Adela was the king's sister, and where Alara was quick and Rowan was deep, Adela was simply immovable, an old woman with a straight back and a plain black gown who had watched Morwenna rise and had never once pretended to be charmed by her. She heard the whole of it from Alara in the space of a poured cup of tea, and she did not weep and she did not exclaim. She set down the cup. "So my great-nephew has been carrying physic to Isolde's nursery woman in the dark, and letting them call him a rake to keep her safe, and that creature means to make a scandal of it to put her own whelp on the throne." She said it flatly, as a woman confirming an inventory. "I have waited 9 years for that woman to overreach. Very well." She looked at me. "Guardsman, you have the truth on your little machine." "I have it, Your Highness." "Then here is what we do, and we do it in this hour because that woman's men do not keep court hours." And she laid it out with the calm of a general, and I understood why the king still trusted her against his own wife. She was the last person left in the house whom Morwenna could not frighten, because Adela remembered her as a girl, and you cannot be frightened by a person you have seen learn to curtsy. Adela sent for 2 of her own household guard, old men, her men, sworn to her line and not to Morwenna's coin, and she wrote, in her own hand, an order under her own seal as a princess of the blood, that the widow and the child in the river quarter were, from this hour, under the personal protection of the crown, to be removed to the almshouse of St. Cuthwin's under the house's charity, the physician's care to be paid from the privy purse, and no person of the household save Adela herself, Alara, and the king to know where they had been taken. It was, strictly, beyond her authority to issue a loan. She issued it anyway. "If my brother wishes to hang me for saving a sick child from his wife," she said, "he may try. Go." and I went out of my ceremonial coat and into a plain one, down the river road in daylight this time, at a pace just short of a run, with Adela's 2 old guards behind me and her sealed order in my breast where the camera usually rode. I will not stretch it out. We reached the low door before Cassius's men did by an hour, we later learned. No more than an hour, and I knocked the 2-and-1 that Rowan had knocked, so the widow would open to a friend. And when the door opened on her frightened gray face, I said the only thing that would make her trust a stranger. The lamp. I've come from the man who fills your lamp. He sends me to take you and the boy somewhere warmer, before others come who wish you ill. And she looked at me a long moment. This woman who had learned in the hardest school there is that strangers at the door mean harm. And then she looked at Adela's seal, which she knew, having served in a house where such seals were law, and she began, without a word, to gather the boy's few things. The boy was better. That is the thing I want set down, because it is the thing that mattered most and the court cares about it least. The fever had turned, just as she'd said. He was thin as a reed and gray with the long illness, but his eyes were clear, and he watched me from the pillows with the grave, unafraid curiosity of a child who has been very ill and is beginning, cautiously, to be a child again. We wrapped him warm, and Adela's men carried the pallet between them, gentle as if it held the crown jewels, and we took them out of that low room and away to the almshouse of St. Cuthwin's, where there was a fire and a physician paid and a locked gate and old soldiers at it. And we did it in the space of an afternoon. And when Cassius's men came knocking their coin-bought knock on the low door that evening, they found it standing open on an empty, swept, cold room, and a neighbor who swore, for a coin of her own, that the widow had never lived there at all. I have thought since that this was the true climax of the whole business, though the court remembers the other, louder one. The saving of the child was quiet, and it was fast, and no one applauded it, and it decided everything. By the time the household council sat, the hostage was gone from the board. The lever had no fulcrum. Morwenna's whole design, that had been built to spring the instant Rowan's silence broke, now had nothing to spring upon, because we had reached under the trap and lifted out the innocent, and left her holding a mechanism that closed on empty air. But she did not know that yet. And so the council sat, 2 days early, in the great council chamber under the old banners, and Morwenna walked into it certain she was about to win. I was there. I had contrived to be there. Adela had seen to it, posting me at the chamber door as part of the ceremonial watch which no one questioned, a guard being furniture to a court, and I had at my collar the coin of glass. And in the pocket of a clerk who was Adela's man, there was the means to show what it held. For I had learned, that camera being a modern thing in an old house, that its little slip of memory could be read on a device, a flat glass thing the size of a hymnal, that the clerk carried, and that could be joined to the great chamber's own display, the panel the heralds used to show the maps and genealogies at a state council, so that what one small camera had seen could be thrown up large for a whole chamber to witness. It was Alara who had thought of it. The old house had put a modern eye in its council chamber for the reading of documents, and never dreamed it would one day be used to hang a queen. The chamber filled. The king came in gray and stooped and sat beneath the banner of his house, and he would not look at his son. Rowan came in last, alone, in his own fine coat this time, his face closed and calm as a shut door, a man walking to what he believed was his ruin, and had decided to walk to it with dignity rather than spend the innocence to escape it. He did not know what Alara and Adela and I had done. We had kept it from him deliberately, for if he had known the child was safe, his face would have shown a hope that Morwenna would have read, and we needed her certain, right up to the last, that she still held the knife. Chamberlain Voss read the forms in his dry voice. The charge was laid, that the crown prince had thrice broken the king's express order and the protocols of the house, leaving the palace by night, alone, unlogged, upon errands he would not name, in a manner that endangered the honor and security of the crown. The prince was invited to answer. Rowan stood. "I broke the king's order," he said. "I do not deny it. I left the palace at night. I do not deny it. I will not tell this council where I went or why." A murmur ran the length of the chamber, the sound of a court hearing exactly the confession it had been trained to expect. "I ask only that my father remember he has known me all my life, and weigh that against 3 nights he does not understand." It was the wrong thing to say to that chamber, and he knew it, and he said it anyway because it was true, and Rowan had never in his life been able to say a false thing to save himself. He sat, and the murmur said, plainly as words, "Guilty." Morwenna rose. She was magnificent, I will grant her that to the grave. She wore grief like a state gown. "My lords," she said, "it breaks my heart to stand here. I have loved this boy as my own, a lie so smooth it left no ripple, and I have prayed the answer to his silence would be an innocent one. But I can be silent no longer, for I have learned the truth of where the crown prince goes in the dark, and I put it to this council that you must hear it, however it grieves us, before you decide whether such a man is fit to one day hold the throne." She turned to the king, all sorrow. "My lord husband, your son has been slipping out to the poorest quarter of the town, to a low house by the river, to consort with, and to lavish the crown's coin upon, the household of a woman your first wife once employed, and I was obliged to dismiss for cause. A washerwoman. My lord, I do not know what draws a crown prince 3 nights a month to a washerwoman's hovel in the dark, and I will not stain this chamber with guessing. But I say that a man who spends the crown's honor so, in secret, against his father's own order, upon persons of no account, a man so ruled by whatever passion or folly draws him there that he will risk his succession for it, is not a man to be trusted with a kingdom. I say the succession must be reviewed. I say it with a breaking heart, but I say it." And she had done it. In the light she had chosen before she could be stopped, she had made the mercy into filth and the child into evidence, exactly as Rowan had spent everything to prevent. The chamber rocked with it. I saw the king's face go gray as ash. I saw Cassius by the door permit himself the smallest smile. I saw Rowan close his eyes, not in guilt, but in the particular defeat of a man who has watched the thing he bled to protect be dragged into the light and made ugly, and can say nothing, because to defend it is to endanger it further. Then Princess Adela stood, straight-backed in her plain black gown, and said in a voice like a closing gate, "Before this council reviews anything it will see. My lord brother, you have heard the Queen Consort's account of where your son goes in the dark. There is a truer account. It was recorded whole by a man of your own guard on the night in question, and I ask leave to lay it before you. Not her words about the thing itself." She raised her hand toward the herald's panel. "Show them." And the clerk, Adela's man, joined the little slip of memory to the great panel, and the chamber's lamps were dimmed, and onto the panel where the maps of the realm were wont to be shown there came instead, large and clear, the dark of the river road, the low door, the small brave lamp, the truth itself, as one small camera at a guard's collar had faithfully seen it, about to speak in the one voice no shape and no queen could gainsay. The chamber watched in a silence so complete I could hear the lamps. They saw the low door open. They saw the widow in the lamplight with her raw red hands and her worn gray face, and they heard her voice, cracked, tired, glad, say the words I had heard in the dark. "You came. God bless you, you came again." And then they saw, in a groom's plain coat, with no star and no order and no mark of rank, the crown prince of Eldermore step into the light, and they saw him not as the court knew him, cool, closed, arrogant in his silence, but as I had seen him, gentle and rough with holding something down, kneeling by a small bed in a poor clean room to lay his own hand on a sick child's brow. They saw him tip a spoon of dark physic between the boy's lips with a patience no servant could have counterfeited. They heard the widow say the whole spoon, and the fever's turned. I truly think it's turned. And they heard the prince say, "Don't spend any words. Get what sleep you can. I'll send the second bottle before dawn." And they heard the widow's terrible small laugh. They'd make it filth, wouldn't they? They'd make it something to shame you, when it's the only clean thing. And they heard Rowan answer, "Hush now. It's not the only clean thing, but it's ours, and we'll keep it ours." They heard him name, in his own gentle voice, the exact crime Morwenna had just committed against him, spoken aloud in the dark weeks before she committed it. They'd make it filth. And there she stood, in her gown of grief, having just made it filth in front of them all. The panel went dark. The lamps came up, and the great council chamber of the house of Harrogate sat in a silence I have never heard the like of before or since. The silence of a great many people rearranging, all at once, everything they had believed. It was the king who broke it. He had risen from his seat without any of them noticing, an old man on his feet with tears standing openly on his gray face, and he was not looking at the panel any longer. He was looking at his son. "You carried it yourself," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "3 nights, in the cold. And you let me believe he could not finish it. A father's shame is a terrible thing to watch on an old face." Rowan stood to meet him, and for once he did not close the door of his face. "I couldn't tell you, father," he said quietly. "If I told you, I told the room, and if I told the room, I told her. And if she knew the child existed, she'd have used the child. I couldn't prove I was innocent without handing her the very thing I went out into the dark to keep from her hands. So I let you think the worst of me. I'm sorry. It was the only door I could see that didn't lead through a sick child." "And it never occurred to you," the king said, wondering, "to save yourself and let them fend?" "No," said Rowan simply, "it didn't." That single word, "no," it didn't, did more to that chamber than the whole of the footage. Because they had watched the mercy, but the word was the man. A prince who would rather be called a rake before the whole court, rather have his succession put in doubt, rather break his own father's heart, than spend one sick washerwoman's grandson to buy back his good name. The lords of that house had come in believing they were about to judge whether Rowan was fit to be king. They understood in that word that they had never in their lives met a man fitter. Then every eye in the chamber turned slowly to the Queen Consort. She had not moved. She stood exactly where she had stood to deliver her grief, and I watched her do the thing I had seen her do to lesser prey 100 times, watched her mind race behind her still face for the shape she could build from this, the words that would turn it, and find, for the first time in 9 years, that there were none. You cannot build a shape against a thing the whole room has seen with its own eyes. The footage had done to her exactly what silence had done to Rowan. It had taken from her the only weapon she had, which was the space between what people knew and what they feared, and it had filled that space completely with the truth. It was Princess Adela who spoke the sentence, because it was Adela's right as the eldest of the blood, and because Adela had waited 9 years to speak it. "You knew," she said to Morwenna, without heat, which made it worse. "You put men in the town to find out what he was hiding, not to clear him, but so that you could reveal it in the ugliest light of your own choosing. You did not stumble on this. You hunted it. You meant to make a crime of a mercy and a bastard's cause of a good woman's grandchild, all to move your own son one step nearer a throne that was never his. I have watched you empty this house of every soul my brother's first wife ever loved. I have watched you do it softly, so that no single stroke could be named. This one can be named, and I name it before the king and the council and God. Not the crown prince, but the Queen Consort, has this day dishonored the house of Harrogate." No one gainsaid her. That was the thing. In all that chamber full of people who had feared Morwenna for 9 years, not one voice rose to defend her, because fear only holds while the frightened believe the feared one will win, and they had just watched her lose on a lit panel in front of them all. Cassius had already gone quietly gray by the door. He had bet his whole young life on his mother's certainty, and he had just watched the certainty end. The king's judgment, when it came, was not loud. He had never been a loud man, and grief had made him quieter still. He did not have his wife dragged out. The house does not do such things, and Adela had been careful to build no charge that required it. He did something worse for a woman like Morwenna. He simply, permanently, stopped believing her. He removed her from the council. He restored to Rowan every honor and every right of the succession, unqualified before them all, and he did it with his hand on his son's shoulder, so that no one could ever again pretend there was daylight between them. He ordered that Isolde's people who yet lived be sought out and restored to the house's charity, the widow and the boy first among them, under the crown's open protection now that they no longer needed the dark. And to Morwenna he said only, in front of the whole chamber, the sentence that I think broke her more surely than any dungeon: "You will retire to the West House. You will keep such state as befits your rank. And you will never again be in a room where my son's honor is discussed, madam, because you have shown this house that you cannot be trusted within reach of it." Then he turned his back on her, in front of the court, which at that court is the whole of a sentence. She went, Cassius went with her. The court, which had opened its inch of cold space around Rowan a fortnight before, closed that space now and opened it around her instead, and I do not doubt that the same footmen who had whispered the shape of the prince's guilt were, by nightfall, whispering the shape of the Queen Consort's fall. That is a court. The machine of small movements runs the same whichever way the wind blows through it. But for once, that day, it ran toward the truth. They wanted afterward to make me the hero of it. I would not have it, and I want to set down plainly why, because it is the only part of this the court has never understood. I broke the king's order the night I let Rowan pass. I broke another following him. I wore, for 6 months, a camera that a dozen protocols forbade. By every letter of the service I had sworn. I was the one man in the whole business who had failed his duty most completely. When the king, in his gratitude, offered to overlook it, to call the camera a security measure, to call my disobedience discretion, I asked him instead to hear the truth of it, and to judge me by it, because I had spent a fortnight watching what happens to a house when men decide the truth is too dangerous to be spoken, and I would not begin my own reward by asking him to shade it. The king heard me out, and then he did a thing I did not expect. He did not overlook it. He did better. He made the wearing of such a camera the new protocol of the king's guard, not hidden but issued and known, a plain eye on every long watch, so that, he said, no man of my guard will ever again stand accused with only his word to answer, as you once did Corwin Hale, and so that the truth of this house, whatever it is and whoever it shames, will always have one honest witness that cannot be frightened or bought. He kept me at my post. He did not raise me above it. I did not want to be raised above it. The post was the whole of what I had ever wanted. But he had a small brass plate set into the stone of the east colonnade where I stood my watch, and it bore no name, only a line, and the line was this: "The truth kept in silence is still the truth, and one day it asks to be seen." I saw the boy again once a year on. He was well by then, thin still, but running, with the particular loud joy of a child who has been given back a life he'd half lost. The widow had been settled in a good almshouse under the crown's charity, and the boy was being schooled at the house's cost, quietly, no name made of it, exactly as Rowan had always wanted it done. The prince still went to see them, but in daylight now, and in his own coat because there was nothing left to hide. I stood my post the day he took the boy to see the palace gardens, and the boy stopped in front of me. Statues fascinate the young, and stared up at the tall, silent guard in the red coat, and asked the prince, in a carrying whisper, whether I was real or only stone. "He's real," Rowan told him, and I felt the prince's eyes on my unmoving face, and I knew he was remembering a cold corridor and a groom's coat and a man who let him pass. "He's the realest man in this whole house. He kept a secret in the dark once, until it was safe to bring it into the light. That's the hardest thing a man can do, and the most honorable, and almost nobody ever knows he's done it." The boy considered this with great seriousness, the way the young consider everything. Then he reached up. I did not move. A guard does not move, and he laid one small warm hand flat against the polished brass of my belt buckle, the way you touch a thing to be sure it's true, and he said, "Thank you," though I do not think he knew for what, and neither did I, and it did not matter. Some debts are paid without either party knowing the sum. They went on into the gardens, the prince and the boy he had gone into the dark to save, and I stood my post and watched them go, motionless and forward-eyed as the service demands, with a small honest camera at my collar seeing what I saw, recording nothing that day but sunlight, and a child running, and a man walking free of a shape that had nearly destroyed him, in the clean and open light of a house that had, for once, chosen to see the truth rather than the fear. That is the whole of it, told straight. The Crown Prince broke royal protocol. He broke it 3 cold nights a month, in a groom's coat, to keep a dying child alive, and he let a queen make a scandal of it rather than spend the innocents to save himself. And a plain guard with a coin of glass at his collar caught the truth of it in the dark, and held it in silence until it was safe, and then brought it into the light, where it did the only work that truth is ever finally for. It cleared the innocent, and it named the guilty, and it set a good man free. I have stood many watches since, and I will stand many more, and I have never once regretted the night I disobeyed. There are orders, and there are the reasons orders exist, and now and again the two point in opposite directions, and on that night a man must choose which he serves. I served the reason. I would serve it again. And if there is honor in me, it is only this, that when the truth was dangerous, I did not throw it away to be safe, and when it was safe, I did not keep it hidden to be comfortable. I kept it in the dark until the dark was over, and then I let it be seen. That is what the camera caught. That is what it was always for.